Hello, this is Recovery Diaries in Depth. I'm your host, Gabe Nathan. Thanks so much for joining us. We're very happy to have you here. We are so grateful to have on Recovery Diaries in Depth, Sheri Heller. She's a certified coach, an addiction specialist, Ericksonian hypnotist, and an interfaith minister. She's also the author of the memoir, A Clinician's Journey from Complex Trauma to Thriving. Each week, we'll bring you a Recovery Diaries contributor, folks who have shared their mental health journey with us through essay or video format. We want to see where they are on their mental health journey since initially being published on our website. Our goal is to continue supporting our diverse community by having conversations here on our podcast to follow up and see what has shifted, what has changed, and what new things have emerged. We're so happy to have you along for this journey. We want to remind you to follow our show for new and back episodes at recoverydiaries.org. There, like the podcast, you'll find stories of mental health, empowerment, and change. You can also sign up for our mailing list there so you never miss a new podcast episode, essay, or film. And you can find this podcast pretty much anywhere you get your podcasts. We appreciate your comments and feedback about our show. It helps us improve, make changes, and grow. And of course, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. I'm so glad to have you with us today. Sheri Heller, welcome to Recovery Diaries in Depth. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you. Great to be here.
We have such a tremendous collection of human beings who are associated with this site and with this organization. And you came to us very early on in our organization's being. And it's so interesting because you have had a connection with Bud, our founder.
Mm-hmm.
You have had a connection with Glenn, who produces and creates all of our films. You have a connection with Laura, who is an editor of ours, and who's been with us since almost the very, very beginning. But this is really my first opportunity to really connect with you. And I feel so lucky to be able to do that through Recovery Diaries in Depth. And I just want to hear from you kind of how you came to us. And so we can kind of get the beginning of that story.
Mm-hmm. Okay. My mother had passed, and I had a very turbulent relationship with her. She was diagnosed as paranoid schizophrenic. She was in and out of mental hospitals. I incurred complex trauma. My whole trajectory of mental health, I've also chronicled through my writings, and I needed a space to really share my grief, and writing was always a vehicle for that for me. And I always loved to read as a child, and I wrote a piece to her during this very turbulent time, and I felt compelled to seek out a platform where I could share it with others who would understand this very singular type of experience of grief, because it's very different than ordinary grief. And I had been mourning for a very long time prior to my mother's death. That's part of the healing process from trauma. So I found OC87 Recovery Diaries, and I was really moved by a lot of the material that I found on the site. And I reached out to Bud. I submitted my essay, my piece to my mother in Orphans Memorial. And he curated it. He contacted me. Glenn contacted me, and they asked me if I would be willing to meet with them for an interview to do an animated short. And Glenn came to Brooklyn, where I was living at that time. I now live in Canada. It's a big change that's happened. And it was an amazing, powerful experience. I mean, I really re-engaged with a lot of material that I had processed in therapy. But it was brought to a creative level, an artistic level, which made it all the more meaningful. And then I met Laura. I was also putting together my book of essays, and then Laura reached out. So I felt like the OC87 recovery team was just such a powerful source of support in my recovery process. And then and then there was the constellation of films that Glenn had done that was aired, and I was asked if I would contribute to that. And so it's been incredibly meaningful being a part of this organization. And it's such a wonderful space for people who are struggling with mental illness, who are children of those and have loved ones with mental illness. So I was so lucky to find you.
Well, the luck is very reciprocal, Sheri, and I want you to know that.
Thank you.
Because if it were not for people like you who are making a choice to be vulnerable, to really stand naked before the world, like you have no idea who is going to be engaging with the film, who is going to be engaging with the essay. You have no idea when you put something out into the world, something creative and something personal, it is such a fragile, vulnerable thing. Because people can be very cruel. I mean, this isn't a newsflash, right? And it, sometimes unintentionally so. But the wound is the same, I think, whether it's volitional or not. And I just, we would be nothing if it were not for people like you who decided, I want to come forward. I want to share my story. I want to let people in as opposed to shutting people out.
Right.
And I think it's absolutely extraordinary. And there's one more thing I want to say that so this podcast is grant funded, and we're funded by a grant from the Van Ameringen Foundation. And it's, I mean, everything we do on the podcast is because of them. And one of the reasons that we sought a grant to support this podcast, not because the world needs another podcast, because it does not, but because I was getting scared that we were kind of a transactional organization, that someone would come to us, they say, I have an essay, I have a story I want to tell. We say, okay, we edit it, we pay them a sum, we publish it. There's some, social media activity, people read it, and then you go to the next one. And then that relationship with that person kind of ends. And that was really upsetting to me, that I don't want that. I don't want to be a transactional organization. I want to, and I even said this to you, I think at the beginning or before we start, like being a member of our community, like that's what I want. I want a community here. And you're living proof that it's not transactional, that there is this thread over years of initially approaching Bud with the essay, and then it's the interview with Glenn in the basement in Brooklyn, and creating the animated short, and the review by Laura, and now you're back on the podcast. So for some people, it is a one and done thing, and we never hear from them again. But there are lots of examples of a through line. And not to kind of hijack this interview and talk about like, oh, Pat Recovery Diaries on the back, and we're so great. But it's a lovely, wonderful thing to look someone in the eye and know that they're really a part of this organization. And I'm really grateful to you for kind of talking about the through line, because it helps me see it. Because I think sometimes I lose sight of that in just the day-to-day work that we do. So thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. I mean, I think there are so many far-reaching implications of your organization, and I shared the work with my clients because I'm a psychotherapist. I work with trauma survivors, and they were very moved. And also, of course, that's sort of radical, given that I stepped out of that neutral zone. But that's the way I work, appropriately, of course, with clients to inspire them or to let them know I understand their plight. Because the plight for someone with complex trauma is very prolonged, very extensive. I haven't encountered that many people who are daughters of schizophrenics, which is interesting. And that's even in my fellowship meetings that I would go to when I lived in New York. And it was pretty unique, other than I think my exposure to NAMI.
I was just going to ask about NAMI. Like, have you engaged in like NAMI family to family? I feel like that might be a resource to connect you with. Have you encountered
NAMI,
anybody?
oh yeah, NAMI helped me. My mother was homeless. I went through quite an ordeal with her homelessness. I went to the Supreme Court and got a mental health petition to try to find her. She refused to go to a mental hospital. I wanted to take her to Payne Whitney, and which is kind of captured in the short.
Yes.
But they were amazing, NAMI. They had attorneys, psychiatrists who spoke to me relentlessly. They said, listen, and I was surprised by that position, and I'm so grateful for it. They said, you cannot take her in. She will become your legal responsibility, and she needs a treatment team. You will ruin your life. But I was caught in that place of feeling so bereft, with guilt, and torn about how to manage this situation. And but I took their advice, which I'm very glad I did. Eventually, she did end up in a shelter system. She ended up in community access, but no longer exists. They didn't have funding, but that was kind of short-lived. It was an unfortunate trajectory. That was a very powerful time. And NAMI, I don't know if NAMI wasn't available, that would have been exceedingly more difficult for me to navigate.
And I'm not sure of the timing of when you became a psychotherapist, or but I'm assuming that you were navigating this as someone who had pretty significant knowledge of the mental health system. And
Yeah.
So that's something that has come up in other interviews that I've done and other people whom I've spoken to. And I mean, I used to work in a locked inpatient crisis facility. And, so navigating, I have my own mental health challenges. And even for someone who is in the system and knows the system, it's so fucking hard to get
it's
help.
insane.
And that's the word. I mean, that's the word for it, right?
Yeah.
To get help, to get to know resources, to navigate the insurance system, laws, regulations, the very, very fractured nature of the mental health system. Oh, well, this varies by this county, and that county does it this way, and this county has mobile crisis, and this county doesn't. And they have a ride along with the police, but it's. I don't even know where I'm going with this, but I guess where I'm going with it is I'm kind of fishing for that, like that statement of like, yeah, even how do normal, just regular everyday people who don't have this knowledge do any of this with a loved one, who's really, really ill.
Yeah. And right now it's worse than ever. I mean, there are no resources available, at least at the time. And when I don't know how I would have even encountered treatment for myself, in this day and age, because I was 18 when I had to live on my own. I was working 3 jobs. I was able to connect with a therapist I went through an interview at Bellevue, and then they referred me to someone at NYU, Langoni, who was doing his internship. He's now a very well-known clinician, wonderful man. He was like a father to me, and I worked with him for over a decade. But those resources were available then. I could avail myself of health insurance, being a student, working part-time. You don't have these benefits anymore. So,
or if you do, you're paying through the nose for them.
Yes, it's cost prohibitive. Absolutely. Absolutely. And even when I've done some pro bono work I did a theater project I brought to underserved girls and worked in foster care, and Girls from Phoenix House. And that I had to apply for grants and fellowships, and it was unbelievable amount of work, copious paperwork, having to try to raise funds for that. So I was fortunate. I was fortunate that there was access to resources, mental health resources. And even when my mother needed to be hospitalized, I mean, there were some improvements because her early experiences were really heinous in mental health. She
I'm
had
sure.
electric shock without any kind of sedation, and she was petrified. Um, so trying to get her into treatment became an impossibility. And I think there was also assault that happened to her when she was at Pilgrim State, which is one of the worst asylums. So there is a really dark underbelly of psychiatry, as we know. And I feel like you have to be very intelligently guarded navigating the system. You have to know what to look for. I'm very proactive with my clients in doing resourcing for that reason, and helping them to try to navigate a very difficult system and to know what to look for. And yeah, I'm kind of astounded. Also, a lot of people just come out of graduate school and put a shingle out and don't work in the public sector. They don't do the necessary work to cultivate their acumen, their ability as a clinician. And I have so many clients who come to me who are in treatment for years and didn't do any deep work. I mean, we're just sort of skimming the surface for a long time. So it can be disheartening. I think you have to be very creative, which is why I looked for OC87 Recovery Diaries, because I felt there's got to be a place where people can share their stories, and have some kind of healing through creative expression and through community.
So there's a lot that is swimming in my brain as you were talking, but there's one thing that I've been wanting to ask you related to kind of the last thing that you said here, healing through creative expression. And so obviously that's a cornerstone of who we are and what we do and why we do what we do the way we do it. But I don't want to be ignorant of the fact or misleading to say that, like, every time you explore something related to your mental illness in a creative way, it's going to be healing, or it's going to be solely healing. I know that there's a risk there, and that anytime you're, quote, going there, you're opening yourself up to the risk of re-traumatization.
Yeah.
You're potentially stepping foot into something that you may not know how it's going to affect you. And our editors, I mean, I'm a former mental health provider, but we are not therapists, and we are here to help you tell your story in as safe as possible, empathic way. But we are not with you in your physical space to help take care of you and all of that. And our work is done remotely, so we only know what we hear from you via email.
Yeah.
So we don't have the full story of what's going on. And I understand also that a component of recovery is personal responsibility, and that, right, it's your personal responsibility to really look into yourself, engage. Am I ready to engage in this creative process? Do I take responsibility for what may happen? I get that.
Yeah.
But can you just talk a little bit about that risk, and your own personal evaluation about, okay, am I ready to go here? What could this be like for me? If you can just talk about that, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts about that.
Okay. I do think you have to do adequate work to be able to know you have the tools to regulate yourself. to be in your body, to deal with what's called abreaction, which is, catharsis that is very prevalent when you do artistic work. And I work with some people who have multiplicity and who have very, very severe trauma. And when they do art, that is typically when they regress or parts come out, alters may emerge. And art in itself, because it speaks to metaphorical language, that bypasses our cognition. And we're so good as survivors with soldiering through life and relying on our cognition, intellectualizing, minimizing, rationalizing all the ego defenses. So when you engage with art, and for me, I really loved performance art, doing psychodrama, which is very powerful. um, you do have to consider the consequences of that kind of work. So when I did the theater project and workshop with women, we had to do a lot of debriefing. There had to be a lot of pacing. I think that you're ready to do the work when you have access to your grief, when you are connected to your feeling faculties, when you've done an ample amount of work to re-engage in an embodied way with yourself. I would not do art therapy alone. I think you could do some of it on your own, but there needs to be a witness. There needs to be some kind of guidance through it, because it can be very regressive, can really, like when I look at this piece for me that I wrote years ago, I already feel it in my body. I feel the sadness. I feel the history with my mother. And it's actually feeling it tells me I'm ready to engage with it, right? I'm not so afraid that I have to disappear. But this is why I see creative expression as so integral to recovery and healing, because it allows us to engage with those parts of ourselves we had to disown to survive.
Thank you very much for sharing that. It's really helpful for me to hear as someone who runs a mental health publication and to remind myself of those things. And I think it's going to be very helpful for listeners who are contemplating creative exploration related to something about their mental health. Because I think so often we go into something because we feel an itch or an impulse, and it may not be the right time or the right environment. And I just love what you said about really feeling and knowing that that's a signal that it's right. That there isn't that need to detach in order to get through it, that you can actually be present with those feelings. That's so helpful to hear, because I think some people might say, oh God, I'm feeling so much, it means I'm not ready. But actually feeling is such a positive indicator. You're there, you're present. When I think back to working at the hospital, particularly with individuals with chronic paranoid schizophrenia, one of the things that struck me was like visiting hours. There was hardly ever anybody there for these people. The patients who, there was a suicide attempt, or there was major depression, or, there were visitors, there were family. A lot of times the folks with schizophrenia, they'd be in their rooms or in the hallway, and there just weren't people there. And I was realizing over time there that the illness is so destructive, and it is so relentless,
Hmm.
and it is so, frequently not responsive to treatment, or, there's treatment and then the patient goes off treatment, and then there's recidivism and is
Yeah.
in and out, and 100th admission, 111th admission, and on and on and on. And that, bridges get burned and families are like, it's like what NAMI was telling you, like it will eat you alive.
Yeah.
Um, I'm just wondering from the perspective of the family member, like, can you just talk about the toll and the living in that environment, with your mother having delusions
Yeah.
and paranoia, and just the I know it's indescribable, but if you can just talk briefly about that impact on you as a child.
Okay. Well, I almost died from the abuse when I was about between 2 and 3. I had sepsis. I wasn't allowed to go to the bathroom. My sister and I were malnourished. Um, my mother kept us hostage in the house. My mother also had some character pathology. That's important to say, which I could not detect until many, many, many years later in my own therapy, because the schizophrenia obfuscates the
Sure.
personality. But I mean, there was a lot of domestic violence. My father was also mentally ill. And then he was out of the house. My mother was 2PC'd. We were sleeping in a park. Um, and I remember that. I remember being on the swing. I remember my mother being taken away. Um, and there were 2 psychiatrists. Being 2PC means she had to, the state intervened at that point. My sister and I were to be wards of state. I went to live with my grandmother. Thankfully, there was kinship foster care. I met with people I never knew, I never met before. My grandmother took care of me. And that's when I was told by a doctor that I was dying. And a lot of doctors did not see. They thought it was emotional because I was in shock. I didn't speak. So my early development was very turbulent. I had a lot of developmental disasters. And thankfully, I did bond with my grandma. Um, and I found my voice. I loved animals. I remember seeing my grandmother had friends next door who had a dog named Queenie, and I would go visit her. And I started coming out of my shell. I read a lot. My father was an artist. I gravitated towards the arts, music. It was very internal. And I guess, that really shaped me. And then my parents reconvened and it was just a disaster. My mother came out of the hospital and it became exponentially worse. By the time I was in adolescence, I was using drugs and alcohol to function. I had always done really well in school, and school was a respite for me. But once I hit adolescence, I was not interested in academia. And that was a very difficult time for me. I was couch surfing. I talked about this in the short.
Mhm.
I lived at friends' houses. Sometimes, if I was with my mother, we didn't have food, we didn't have utilities, there were always eviction notices. My father was the same. He was also lived in squalor. So I latched on to friends. I latched on to, at one point, I think I was really at a low point, and I knew that if I didn't take radical action, I was going to die. I was about 17, so I enrolled in college, CUNY, City University, and I don't know how I did it. I got a place to live through the university, and I worked 3 jobs. And I remember my first night lying in my twin bed on the floor at a lone towel. And I thought, I have to make this work because I have nothing else. It's a lot to remember.
It's absolutely extraordinary, and I don't. It's one of those things that I don't think people can really understand unless it's happened to them or something similar has happened to them. I certainly can't understand or even begin to fathom what that must have been like for you, for your sister. Um, I I mean, speaking of which, can you talk a little bit about her and what her
Mhm.
trajectory was like?
Yeah, my sister actually died recently.
I'm
She
sorry,
was,
Sheri.
thank you. She was an addict. We were estranged. She was a brilliant young woman, a great pianist, had a faculty with languages. Um, but she was the parentified one in the family, and she tried to do some work on herself. She was in treatment for a few years, but with this kind of damage that we incurred, I mean, I still work with a mentor, a therapist, a psychodramatist who I trust and love, and but my um, history has spanned over 30 years, and I feel like that's what it required. So my sister became very abusive. Unfortunately, we were very close. She and I would try to sneak out of the house to have some exposure and socialization. And she was 7 years older than I. But she never got sober. She had emphysema. She was still smoking. And she did have a daughter. There was a lot of turbulence in our relationship that is painful to examine, because we tried at certain points to try to reconvene, but there was always this rage that I experienced from her, and I wanted to go into treatment with her, but I also understood she had to have a degree of sobriety in order for anything to be effective. So I walked away from everyone. I had to walk away from everyone, including my mother. And I had a talk with my mother in a restaurant about that, because the the character pathology in the family negated my existence. I was to conform to the roles and to the and collude in the lunacy
Hmm?
of which meant I was to be the scapegoat, I was to be silenced, and unfortunately, no one else wanted to join me on a path of healing, so I had to leave. Um, and it was a terrible loss with my sister. I actually have a cousin that I'm becoming close to who, and we talk about this, the only one I think in my extended family who has really reached out and has expressed regret that they couldn't do more. But she was also a child. Um, but being alone, not being, and that's why I called this piece an orphan's memorial to her dying mother. Um, that was the most debilitating part of my experience, the traumatic loneliness. And it catalyzed in me a lot of acting out, um, a lot of desperation. I needed intimacy. I needed closeness. I was terrified of it, but I was insatiable. Um, there was no mirroring. There was no family to rely on. But I did find people along the way, for good or bad.
Hmm.
Um, it was a mixed bag. But my sister and I parted ways. So, and that was a tremendous loss and something that I could not anticipate when I started out with my recovery.
And one of many losses. And I think it's so tragic. And it reminds me of there's a statistic about suicide that for every suicide, there's 126 people, I think is the number, that are profoundly impacted. There's the inner circle, and then there's the friends and acquaintances and the former classmates and the colleague, and the circle goes out. And I think the same is true for serious and persistent mental illness. The ripple effect of that and the relationships that are impacted and sometimes destroyed or altered. And there's such collateral damage. And I think, we as human beings want to control so much. And I think we work so hard and to try to do that. And there's so much out of our control. And the relationship with your sister, for whatever you wanted, like wanting to go into treatment with her and wanting her sobriety and wanting all of these things. But there are some things that we just can't control. And so choices have to be made, profoundly difficult choices. And here we are, and here you are. And, it's very possible that if you hadn't made those choices, you'd be in a very, very different place. And I know you know that. And, the idea of orphaning, you can have both parents living and be an orphan.
Yes.
And I think there's probably a lot of people listening who are nodding their heads and know that, and feel that profoundly. Mental illness or no, or character pathology or no. But I think if you're okay at this point, I would love to hear the piece if you're ready.
Okay, wonderful. I am ready.
Wonderful.
Mother, you are dying a horrible death. A finale consistent with a tragic life. Plagued by paranoid schizophrenia prior to and subsequent to my birth, the nature of our relationship remains unfathomable and immeasurably heartbreaking. Your imminent loss is disorienting. I find myself floundering, still fearful of you, still enraged, and yet also inextricably tied to you in inconceivably baffling ways. After decades of pointless effort, I walked away from you. That pivotal but necessary decision cut me to the core. I could no longer pretend. To this day, you deny and refuse to acknowledge our harrowing history. It's understood that we are to never approach what occurred between you and I. Oddly, that I could handle. What I could no longer permit was your blatant rejection of who I am. The inferred contract to shield you from ever being burdened by my needs, my traumas, my losses had to end. So on that night, over 8 years ago, I dared to be authentic with you. I laid bare the truth about my life, my sorrow, my triumphs, my struggles. Silence ensued. You retreated into psychotic reverie, deserting me, shutting me out, and punishing me for daring to be real. That regrettable moment offered agonizing transparency. I saw the volition in your purposeful retreats, shielding yourself behind your cloak of insanity to obliterate me in the most pernicious way. Mother, in spite of it all, I am haunted by your suffering. I cry for you now as I did as a child, but I refuse to be shackled by agreements that snuff out my spirit. I will not capitulate, even though it means parting forever, devoid of the prescribed ceremonial rituals devised to honor one's passing. Innumerable complex losses and intangible sources of grief permeate our connection. Persistent yearnings for the love and normalcy I never had clash with the reality of prolonged abuse, neglect, and trauma. I was robbed of my birthright, and I paid a staggering price. To my dismay, I am instinctively revisiting the past, returning to my vulnerable formative years, when you were at the peak of your illness. It's when the worst of the abuse occurred. I remember that house, permeated with filth, infested with bugs and garbage. There were so many fucking cockroaches that I thought the walls were alive. My body was a toxic wasteland. I was malnourished, slowly dying from an impacted rectum. Flooded by despair, by 3 years old, I wanted life to be over. It only got worse. Throughout adolescence, I resorted to violence to escape your grip. You would barricade the door, struggling to take me hostage, as you were able to do when I was too young and frail to fight. I've never forgotten you hauling me out of bed, dragging me across the floor, tearing off my nightgown as I begged for mercy. You threw me out of the house naked, the allotted penalty for my expressing anger. I hid behind the milk box by the front door. Flashbacks of your knife and hammer complete the tableau of horror. Now I am angry, and the venom of hatred disturbs my composure. I am viscerally reminded of the crippling damage incurred from our bond. Nonetheless, I pressed on and stayed the course, ironically consummating weighty ambitions to become a psychotherapist and subsequently an interfaith minister. I committed to years of therapy and sundry healing modalities, working multiple jobs to put myself through college and graduate school. To say it was laborious and demanding does not do it justice. The arts, travel, sundry relationships sustained me. But always that dysphoric loneliness brought me to my knees. That immeasurable chasm of intangible, ravenous need will forever be my Achilles heel. It is a constant reminder of what I was denied. Now the end is near, and societal mandates advise me to offer absolution, irrespective of whether you've made any sort of genuine attempt towards restitution. The exalting of an illusory ideal of the mother-daughter dyad is to trump the preservation of my sanity if I am to ostensibly be set free and redeemed as a good daughter. With religious zeal, this is considered a crowning achievement. Along with this cultural prescription, the legitimacy of my self-protective distance and detachment, informed by an instinctual attunement to danger, is deemed punitive and cruel. With despairing righteous indignation, I challenge these badgering collective judgments. How am I to measure up to proclamations that have no bearing on my history or my reality, that fail to consider the enormous complexity and singularity of this surreal bond and this mystifying loss? How do I grieve for a mother I never had? Mother, I am resigned. There is no formulaic pathway to rely on. My sorrowful search for cursory glimpses of you led me to finally accept that you are but a phantom to me. What I am to you continues to confound me. Playwright Robert Anderson wrote, "Death ends a life, but it does not end a relationship which struggles on in the survivor's mind towards some resolution which it may never find. While there is no compensation or opportunity for meaningful reconciliation, mother, for good or bad, as hackneyed as it sounds, you will always be. You will always be a part of me. And I will do what I can to purposefully mourn and willingly carry on with what will forever be unsettled."
Thank you, Sheri. I'm just going to take a minute. I think it's unbelievable to me to consider, as I'm hearing you read these words and watching you, to really understand the immense power of language and words and what you are able to convey through this piece. It's just visceral, and it's so painful, Sheri, and also so beautiful. And I don't know where we would be as human beings without art. I don't know where we would be without language. I don't know, I mean, what would we do? Would we just scream all day, or like
We'd
roll
implode.
around clutching our clothes or throwing things? Or I don't know how else would we live without expression, without the ability to put forth like this. And I am absurdly grateful to you that you put pen to paper and created this.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Gabe. And I'm glad that I found the words. And I connect so deeply to what you're saying. I think I would have completely imploded if I didn't have art. I remember when I was little, my father was an artist. He had art books, and I would just lose myself in. He had a lot of the classics, and I remember looking at the Sistine Chapel, and I would marvel at the beauty, the artistry. And then when I went to Italy and I went to the Vatican, and I remember sitting in that room and crying, and because it sustained me, books sustain me, art. I took acting as a child, had art classes,
Same.
acting classes.
Guilty.
Yeah. And all those outlets, I think, kept me tethered, and offered me a kind of a semblance of a sense of self that was so tenuous. So yeah, I think it is such a critical part of healing.
And I think it's important to also give voice and know or acknowledge that not everybody can do it. Not everybody is ready, like we talked about earlier. Not everybody has the facility or the interest in doing it, or they may have the interest but feel limited in some other way. And so you doing it, I think, is so helpful to other people who can't or don't want to or aren't ready, or just feel more comfortable or safe reading the experience of someone else. And if there isn't that experience of someone else, then they don't have what they need to hold on to. So you're doing this lovely thing for yourself. You're also throwing a lifeline out to other people, I think, also. And that's so critical and wonderfully giving. I think that's something I don't want to lose sight of also, that people who contribute to this site, or they write on their personal blogs, it doesn't have to be here, it can be anywhere. It's giving a gift to someone else who you may have never met and may never meet. And I just think it's really extraordinary. And for all the shit people sling about how social media is terrible and it's awful, it's also crazily connecting. And throwing lifelines here and there to people through just individual advocates or storytellers or people with information or resources that people can find in different countries and just hold on to. And that's, I think what you're creating and bringing here is a really important reminder of that.
Great. Thank you, Gabe. Yeah, I agree. Um, and everything I have gone through, in my life, I sought out web forums, places, platforms, and I incorporate that into my work, so people can find those resources. And there are organizations actually that have connect people throughout the world, to find each other, and even offer virtual groups, virtual meeting places. So, which is not something I necessarily availed myself of early on because it wasn't available to me at that time. Um, but yes, we have to give back. And I think it is part of our purpose to give back. It brings it full circle.
Yeah. And unfortunately, there are always going to be people to give back to. There is always going to
Yeah.
be intergenerational cycles of trauma. There's always going to be people who are severely impacted by other people's mental health challenges or their own. There's always going to be suffering. There are always going to be suicide loss survivors or attempt survivors. There are always going to be people who need others,
Mm-hmm.
who are further along in their journey or in a different place to show them, hey, I'm here. There's hope for you too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that's kind of the last question that I have for you is talking about, you're here now. You were in a different place when you wrote this piece. You were in a different place when you were struggling with your mother to get out of the squalid apartment. Um, you're not in New York anymore. You're in
Mm-hmm.
Montreal. Is that right?
Yes, I'm in
So,
Montreal.
so where is Sheri Heller now? Not geographically, but where is she now in her kind of life's journey?
The most important attainment from my life's journey is that I have a cohesive sense of who I am. I'm no longer plagued by fragmentation, which was terribly painful, or consumed, flooded by heinous flashbacks or crippling numbness. I feel, um, for lack of a better word, whole. Is kind of contrived to say, but I mean, I feel I have a cohesive self, which I never thought I would have. Um, I'm married to a wonderful man, which I never thought would happen. He's a musician and also has his own history of trauma. And so there are critical milestones that I never thought I would be able to actualize in my life. And moving to Montreal, actually, my mother was born in Montreal. And so, by virtue of her being a Canadian citizen, I was able to get Canadian citizenship, which I'm very grateful for. And I have a private practice, and I feel at peace. Of course, I have my neuroses and I have my issues. I'm a human being, but it revisiting that piece I wrote, I mean, it really illuminates for me the reality of where I am now, that I am not in the trenches anymore, that I could, that I'm regulated. And when I'm not regulated, I can regulate myself.
Mhm.
I'm no longer using substances to escape or to have respite from my pain. It feels miraculous, and I'm grateful. And I think that was what inspired me actually to explore my spiritual side. I think that was an organic part of my recovery. Um, and I can engage in life in a way. I always loved nature. That was something also, I think, along with art that sustained me. But I feel I have an ability to appreciate the wonders of the world of life that eluded me when I was just crippled by pain. So I'm content.
Well, Sheri Heller, with your wholeness, with your neuroses, with your contentedness, and with your bravery and vulnerability, I just can't thank you enough for spending some time with me and for being a part of this community. Just so grateful to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabe. Same here. So grateful for you and this platform.
Well, it's going to be around till the wheels come off. So thank you. Thank you again for joining us in conversation today. It's beautiful to see the progression of our contributors. Thank you so much to our guest today, Sheri Heller. She is how we are able to do what we do and the way we do it. An extraordinary human being, she's a certified coach, an addiction specialist, Ericksonian hypnotist, an interfaith minister. She's also the author of the memoir, A Clinician's Journey from Complex Trauma to Thriving. Before we leave you, we want to remind you to check out our website, recoverydiaries.org. There, like this podcast, you'll find additional stories, videos, and content about mental health, empowerment, and change. We look forward to continuing to grow our community. Thank you so much for being a part of it. We wouldn't be here without you. Be sure to join our mailing list so you never miss a podcast episode, essay, or film. I'm Gabe Nathan. Until next time, take good care.